Chiru has no choice. She doesn't choose to go to bed hungry. She wouldn't choose to get married when she's just a child. She doesn't choose poverty. But for once, she does have a choice that could change everything. Today, children like Chiru finally have the power to choose. World Vision is doing something they've never done before. Now the power to choose is in the child's hands. The power to take hold of their future, to reach their full potential and bring change in their community. For the first time, children have the chance to choose their sponsor. And they could choose you. With the power of choice, children can choose to dream. Help a child thrive, not just survive.
Good morning. It's an exciting time that we're in. Just want to say thank you to the team that's kind of been spearheading this whole campaign, putting it together. Thank you, those of you who have participated already, and those of you who intend to. Living generously is a very, very important feature of what we understand it means to be a follower of Jesus. And generosity looks different from person to person in the same way that our physical appearances are different from person to person, and our hobbies and our interests are different from person to person. The gifts, the talents, the things that we do for a living, all these things differentiate us. But it doesn't mean that each of us can't be in the way that God is calling us to be generous, that we can't be generous. And so I just want to encourage you again, and we'll talk a little more as we go on this morning. I'm going to invite you to turn in your Bibles to Micah chapter 6. So we have been in this series that we took a brief intermission on last week, but we're coming kind of to the end of Micah's message. This is the second to last chapter of his book. Up to this point, Micah has, he's sort of gone easy on us because, so much of what he had to say was about people who were actively committing acts of oppression toward other people, who were actively participating in injustices toward us, taking advantage of others. And it would be easy for any of us to kind of read that and see those kinds of things as actions that belong to others, certainly not actions that belong to me and to you. But this morning, I think Micah invites the entire company of the people of God of his day. And so his message is going to go beyond just the elites of the city and the city itself. And it is going to go into the far stretches of the nation of Israel, to every person and every place, to every family, to every individual. And by extension, there's something for us, I believe, to hear as well. I want to ask you to just kind of think about the answer to this question, and that is, when you think of what God requires of us, right? If you've come to the place in your life where you will grant that God exists, and that God has something to do with the goings-on of our world, that God has something to do with our lives, and there is, for you, at least an inkling of an idea that God's paying attention to your life. Or if you're a follower of Jesus, you know very much that God knows all of the details and affairs of our lives. But whatever that may look like for you, what do you suppose God requires of you? Now, if I weren't in a setting like this where, predominantly the room is full of, Christians, people who are kind of reading and studying the Bible, maybe people who've been walking with Jesus for a long time. If I was just talking to a general crowd of let's say, unreligious people, or people who've just been pretty disinterested, in matters of spirituality, religion, and the such. But they would kind of consider themselves in the place where they'd grant that, there must be some being that's responsible for all of this. And I suppose that there's the chance that I might stand in front of such a being one day. And if I were to ask the question, what do you suppose God expects for you? It'd be interesting to hear what some of those answers would be. In just some of my kind of everyday casual conversations with people who aren't following Jesus, it seems like they would kind of boil down things to, things like, well, he probably wants me to swear less. Like, he's probably not happy with how much I cuss. And so, if we were having a conversation, I suppose he'd probably tell me to just kind of lighten up on the F-bomb, right? Or, I suppose it would make sense that God doesn't want me to be mean to people. God wants me to, practice acts of kindness toward others. That would seem like a pretty important thing, important value to him. And it just so happens that I share that as well, and I actually try to do that, right? Like people all over the world have formed a kind of personal, moral ruler for how they're going to rule and operate their lives. But what we're going to learn this morning is that God actually prescribes what he wants from us, what he wants for us. So let's begin. Micah chapter 6. Now, these first 5 verses are very interesting. There's almost like this scene of this kind of like grand courtroom, like where the mountains are called to kind of take witness to this conflict that God is going to raise against the nation of Israel. Micah chapter 6, verse 1. Now, listen to what the Lord is saying. Rise, plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your complaint. Listen to the Lord's lawsuit, you mountains, and enduring foundations of the earth, because the Lord has a case against his people, and he will argue it against Israel. And the way that God begins this argument is by asking a question. In verse 3, he says, my people, what have I done to you? Or how have I wearied you? Testify against me. Verse 4, indeed, I brought you up from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from that place of slavery. I sent Moses, Aaron, and Miriam ahead of you. My people, remember what King Balak of Moab proposed, what Balaam, son of Beor, answered him, and what happened from the acacia grove to Gilgal, so that you may acknowledge the Lord's righteous acts. And so God begins with the question, what have I done to you? Or we might paraphrase as, what wrong have I committed against you? He asks them, how have I wearied you? Like, what is it specifically that you would testify? What burden have I laid upon you that you would consider to be too much to bear? That's what he's asking them. What wrong have I committed against you? I want for you to think about that question being asked of you and of me. As you think about your life, as you think about the experiences that you have walked through, the circumstances that you faced, maybe you're here this morning and you would say, I have some things to say about how God has treated me in this life. And so you could be asked the question, what wrong has God committed against you? Or what has God asked of you that was too much? What do you find intolerable about God, how God calls you to live? For the people of Israel, as many of you know, the Assyrian army was invading the territory, which put great pressure on the people of the country, and it put their safety and their lives even in jeopardy. And so the people would, in these circumstances, likely raise their complaints against God. God, how could you let this happen to us? How could you do this to us? And here they are thinking that they have a complaint against God because of what they're facing, when in reality it is God who is the one justified to complain about them. Now, they might accuse God of being unfaithful to them because of what they were experiencing. But it was actually that they were unfaithful to God, which is why God asks them, why he invites them to be really specific in what they're going to accuse him of when he asks them the question, what have I done to you? You know, there's an interesting parallel here to the scene of what we would call the final judgment that is to come. You know, a lot of people have imagined how they will respond to God if and when they stand before him, ready with their accusations about how God had failed them in this life, how he failed to make himself plainly known to them, how he could have done a better job being the kind of God that they wanted if he actually wanted them to respond to him. The problem is they will find out in the end that they have no really good actual complaint to bring against God. Because God has all along the way, for all of them and for all of us, offered grace that comes by the way of Jesus and the cross. But they, hopefully unlike each of us here today, they responded with apathy and with carelessness, and for that they will be held accountable for how they refused the love that he offered. And such is the case with the nation of Israel, who looks at their circumstances and makes these accusations against God without realizing that they are, by their own actions and by the condition of their own hearts, responsible for what is taking place. Then in verses 4 and 5, God reminds them of how he has actually acted on their behalf. He said, I want you to call to remembrance how I brought you up from Egypt and out of slavery. Do you remember that? How God had given them people. He specifically names Moses, his brother Aaron, his sister Miriam. How he gave them these leaders who would lead them and mediate the covenant that God would make with them. He references this thing that King Balak had proposed as Israel was coming into the promised land, and the king of Moab had this idea to put a curse on the nation of Israel. And so what God is reminding them of is the fact that he intervened whenever the mighty waters formed a blockade in their path. And he intervened when a nation would have cursed them out of existence. And he intervened when an enemy army would have brought defeat. This is what I've done for you, he tells them in recounting his dealings with the nation of Israel. The reality is that God has never been unfaithful. But that doesn't mean that we can't be, like Israel was, forgetful. You know, over time, Israel had lost its gratitude for what God had done. Clearly, they had lost any sense of how God had provided for them and protected them, for how God had rescued and recovered them. And so, any love that they once might have had for him had over a period of time, and more so over the course of generations, had devolved into something that was only routine and not intimate. they had this kind of form of religion that they maintained where it allowed them to remember all of the rules, but they forgot about grace. That in the understanding of the rules, they had actually lost the spirit that was behind the rules. Did you know that for every command that God had given to his people, there was a reason for it? There was a spirit behind it that was meant not for their trouble, but for their good. And they had lost that. They remembered rituals, but they forgot about the rescue and the redemption that those very same rituals were meant to remind them of and give them cause to celebrate. Here they are with their accusations against the unfaithfulness of God. But the real problem was how they had forgotten what God had done. Verse 6, the voice changes, and now we move from God levying this accusation against the nation of Israel in the form of his questions to now kind of from the people's perspective asking this question: what should I bring before the Lord when I come to bow before God on high? Should I come before him with burnt offerings, with year-old calves? Would the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams or with 10,000 streams of oil? Should I give my firstborn for my transgression, the offspring of my body for my own sin? So God had asked the question, what wrong do you accuse me of? And here the worshiper responds, well, okay, then, what sacrifice could I possibly make that would finally please you? It's almost as if, they have this perspective that they are in a relationship with the kind of God that will just never be appeased. That no matter how hard they try, it's never going to be good enough. And so the language of the offerings that they suggest just increase dramatically to this point of ridiculousness. Okay, God, what do you want? Do you want my year-old calves? Is that what you want? Will that make you happy? No, that's not going to do it. Well, how about, what if I bring thousands of rams to sacrifice? How about that? Is that going to do it? Is that going to finally be sufficient for you to be okay? No, that's not enough. Well, how about like streams of oil? The value of which, again, just kind of exceeds anything beyond the scope of actual reality. And then the ultimate, it's like, okay, God, none of that's going to do it. How about, we've heard of, some of these other gods being appeased only with such things as like human sacrifice. What if I brought my firstborn to you? Would that do it? Would that finally get you off my back? And this response of the covenant people, it shows exactly how dense they had become to the nature of who God is and to what the will of God is. And so what God does is he responds in the most obvious terms possible. This is kind of the crucial place of all of the message of Micah, right? This is, if there's a verse that somebody's going to memorize out of all 7 chapters of Micah, this is the one. If you grew up in church, there's a chance that you learned a song that you would sing that reminded you of this verse. Here's what he says in verse 8. Here's how God responds to that. Mankind, or maybe something along the lines of, you mere mortal. He has told you, he has told each of you what is good. He has told you what it is the Lord requires of you. To act justly, to love faithfulness, and to walk humbly with your God. He said, he has told you what is good, and he said, he has told you what the Lord requires. Notice that these two things are one and the same. What God has required is what is good. Are 1,000 or thousands of rams given in sacrifice good? Seems like a bit of a waste to me. These other things that were mentioned, no. What is good and what the Lord requires are one and the same. And here's the hard truth that the people of Israel needed to hear, that I believe we need to hear, and that is that, listen, this isn't actually hard. And God has not hidden what he has required of us. So why did Israel make it so complicated? And why is it, let's be honest, why is it that we sometimes are guilty of making it complicated ourselves? If it really is just that easy. Before we talk specifically about what it means to do justly, and to love faithfulness or mercy or steadfast love, we'll talk about that, or to walk humbly with God, let me just take a little bit of a side road here to uncover some of why I think we might be motivated to just complicate this very, very simple thing. I think it's because simplicity exposes us. If God's will for our lives is actually clear, then the issue is not whether or not we understand what God's will is. The issue comes to whether or not we want to surrender. And that's the difficult thing. It is not hard for anyone to know what is the will of God. It is not hard for anyone to know what is the good. But to allow it to remain in its simplest form exposes us if we are unwilling to surrender to it. Because to act in a way that is just might cost us some of our comfort that we have grown to love. Who doesn't like to be comfortable? I mean, how many of you would be happy if next week all the chairs were gone? We brought back some of those good old-fashioned, 1400s church pews that were like just hard, rigid wood, right? And all of the air conditioners were yanked out. In fact, we were blowing heat in an already hot and humid room. And everybody was commanded not to wear any kind of deodorant or to shower that morning. Like, how many of you would appreciate worshiping in an environment like that? No, we love our comfort, don't we? We love to be comfortable. And the idea that to act justly might require for one of my comforts to be removed, well, that to practice mercy, it might require me to forgive somebody that I would rather condemn, that I would rather hold aught against, that I feel more empowered maintaining my anger and unforgiveness toward. Humility means that I can't remain as the center of my own universe. And this is what makes doing justice and loving mercy and walking humbly with God so difficult, and why we are tempted to complicate what is actually quite simple. How many of you know it's a lot easier to argue about what justice means in all of the complicated scenarios that we are presented with than to actually do justice in the ordinary moments of our lives? Right? Because for as long as we're arguing about it, then we don't really have to do anything about it. Because if we haven't yet defined what doing justice actually looks like, well, then how can I be held accountable to do it? How many of you know it's easier to turn loving mercy into a debate about social policy than it is to show radical mercy to the difficult people who are right in front of you? And walking humbly with God, that's nearly impossible when we are living our lives trying to prove all the time that we're right. When we're trying to outdo the competition, when we're trying to win the affirmation and the applause of other people, and when with covetous eyes and hearts we are trying to keep up with the Joneses. And so perhaps the most honest answer to the question, well, why do we make it so difficult, is because, well, deep down, many of us don't actually want what God calls good. We want what we call good. And then we want to stamp his name on it. Let's talk about doing justice. Doing justice is not arguing about what justice is. And I don't want to just absolutely dismiss the very, very complicated scenarios that do arise whenever we're talking about humanitarian efforts. We don't have time to dive into those. I'm not really interested, but I do think it's important for us to understand that doing justice is not arguing about what justice is. That justice is, at the end of the day, it is something you do. That's why he says, do justice, not think justly. As if, as long as I get my frame of mind to a place where I am thinking positively about justice and righteousness and equity and fairness and all of that, then, well, that's as if I have fulfilled what God requires of me. He says, no, do justice. And when we say that it is something you do, what I think we mean by that is that it means treating people fairly, for one. It means not taking advantage of someone when you have the advantage. It means being unwilling to manipulate someone or try to control someone with abusive tactics like physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse. It means seeing every person as possessing inherent dignity. That means dignity that goes with that person regardless of their lot in life, the place they were born, the education that they have arrived to, the amount of money that they have in their bank, or any other kind of thing that you could use to measure the worth and value of someone. They possess inherent dignity and worth simply for the reason that he or she was created in the image of God. And so justice is something that we do in our everyday actions. For instance, it's performing our work as employees with integrity. It's honoring our word and fulfilling contracts and obligations that we have made with others. It's avoiding shortcuts that you feel like you can get away with, but that you know is probably going to harm somebody else down the road. It's even taking into consideration our levels of consumption and the cost that they may have on people further down the food chain that we might never see or meet. But justice is also something that you do in more extraordinary measures. Meaning, for instance, you become aware of an injustice that you have the power to do something about. And so what you do is you insert yourself into the middle of it. This is one of the closest ways that any of us can imitate Jesus because of how he inserted himself into the injustices that had us trapped and headed toward our own destruction. That Jesus wasn't content to just let us get what we deserved, what we had coming to us, but rather he stepped right into the middle of it. I want to draw a connection to this project that we have going on in Kenya. We have as a church an opportunity to participate in a justice-seeking mission as we adopt this community in Kenya. And this isn't charity. It's recognizing the injustice that exists when a whole community of people lacks the sanitation standards that we wouldn't dare live without. That lacks a supply of clean water when we can turn on the tap or even have a truck deliver thousands of gallons of water to fill up our pool. That lacks education and resources to change the trajectory of future generations, while in our own country it's unlawful for a child to miss school. This is an acknowledgement that the kids that we're sponsoring have names. These are real people, and they have families. And you might not believe this, but they have dreams. Do you remember the dreams that you had, or the dreams that you even have right now? Did you know that even without the luxury of having any reason to dream for anything better than what they are currently experiencing, these kids have dreams? Not only do they have dreams, but they actually have potential. And so for every one of these children that we sponsor, we are actively saying, hey, you matter to God. And you matter to me. Secondly, he says, love mercy. Now this is the Hebrew word here, as some of you know, is the word chesed. It's a very complicated word, and I can't spend a lot of time getting into it. And scholarship will continue to go into the depth and the understanding of what this word means. The problem is, there's just no English word that adequately translates chesed. And so our Bibles will vary in how they translate, especially given the context. Like for some, it'll say, love mercy. Mercy becomes the translation. Some will say something like steadfast love, right? This is used very often to describe the nature of the relationship of God toward the nation of Israel, how he treated them. And so our Bibles, they render this word as loving kindness, as mercy, as steadfast love. But it means, again, something just far richer than any of our English words can capture. It's the foundation of God's character and his relationship with all of humanity. And so what God is saying when he says to love mercy, he's saying, listen, if you want to be like me, if you want to be becoming like me, which God's saying, I know this is what you all want. This is what you've all wanted from day one. Adam and Eve in the garden, what did they want? They wanted to be like God. What do we want? We all want to be like God. And so God says, hey, if you really want to be like me, then you need to be like this. Hesed describes covenantal love with commitment. That is, it's not merely an emotion or a feeling, but rather it's a faithful action, or better, a series of faithful actions that are rooted in loyalty. That when God shows chesed, he is demonstrating, for one, grace beyond obligation. That is, God is, even when he is not obliged to, he exercises grace toward the other party. That is, chesed flows out of generosity and not duty. How many of you know that God does not owe any one of us any one thing? And yet, here we come to Curtis Lake Church Sunday after Sunday, singing songs, talking about all of what God has done. Why has he done that? He's done that because of his steadfast love toward us, his mercy, his faithfulness. It is a steadfast commitment. That is, chesed remains and it persists even when it is undeserved, even when it is rejected. If you know about the history of the nation of Israel, you know that again and again and again they rejected the God who had rescued them from Egypt, who had brought them out of slavery. And yet God, for his part, he continues to pursue him. Some of us have had experiences in our lives where we could describe ourselves as people who have run from God, who've said, no, thank you. Or maybe who have kind of like stepped into with our toes this relationship with God, but then as soon as it starts to kind of like actually take some form or meaning, we're like, whoa, 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 time out. I don't know that I signed up for that. And we are, by nature, unfaithful. We practice infidelity. And even in the midst of that, what does God do? For his part, God continues to pursue us. He continues to come after us. He continues to reach out for us. He continues to stand there waiting for us to embrace him. And he says, if you want to be like me, then you need to be like that. The reason why it's so like God is because in the context of relationship, Chesed is attributed to the party who has the stronger case. It's the party that isn't obligated to respond to the needs of the other or the appeals of the other, but they do it anyway. And this is why the concept of Hesed is sometimes simplified to the idea of mercy or grace or kindness. With regard to Kenya, I'll just point out what is obvious, and that is that none of us is specifically obligated to sponsor a child in Kenya. If you're looking for a way out, there it is. You are under no obligation. I mean, listen, I want to guilt all of us into doing it. But I've got to be honest. You are not obligated to sponsor a child. I imagine that none of us has any specific thing that we can be accused of for why the conditions in Kibani exist. Like, I'm not liable for what's happened there, what is happening there, neither are you. None of us has a relationship to any of these people. There's no family relationship. There's no friendship where there's an expectation that we're supposed to help if someone has a need. And that while I hope that before too long, some of our church will be able to actually go and visit this community, the truth is, most of us will not ever have any kind of face-to-face relationship with any of those people. They will still be people who are 7,300 miles away from here. But that's the whole point of Hesed. It is acting even when there is no obligation to do so. It's being faithful and merciful when no one is forcing you to. So let me close with the last part. What does the Lord require of you? He's shown you what is good. What the Lord requires of you, walk humbly. Walk humbly. To walk humbly means to understand that the point of our lives, or the point of anything that we do really, isn't to impress God or to impress anyone else or to even impress yourself. Like, how many of you ever done something and after you did it, you're like, that was pretty good of me? Right? We've all done that, have we not? How many of you have ever done something motivated just a little bit by the fact that you knew that what you did was somebody was going to see it? And somebody was going to be like, that was so good of you. That was so kind of you. And like, it might not have been the primary motivation, but I mean, like, let's be honest. There's just a little bit of that. I think that's why Shayna made us do this thing earlier today. Create a little bit of kind of peer pressure. The point isn't to impress God. Don't sponsor a child because you want to impress God, because God will not be impressed by your sponsorship. The pastor of your church is not going to be impressed by your sponsorship. My attitude is likely to be more something along the lines of, Well, yeah, you should have. Then to be like, oh, wow, that is so incredible that you did. Because walking humbly this is what it is. It is a daily posture that recognizes how much we need God. That's what walking humbly is. It's this posture that says, my life, my very breath depends on God. And this all said in a world that tells us the opposite, right? The world tells us, hey, throw off all the restraints, do whatever makes you happy. We live in a world that says, hey, you be you. Stop caring about what anyone else, including God, might think about you. We live in a world that says, hey, mortgage the future for today's impulses. Hey, don't worry about borrowing money. Don't worry about racking up debt for something that you want right now, because the money will be there when you need it. That's not humility. The world says there will always be plenty of time for you to make up for lost time. Like you might be here feeling the urge to serve God now, but don't worry about that. Just keep having your fun. Keep seeking your adventures. Keep neglecting a better life. There will be time later on to get to all of that, to get more serious about God, to get more serious about serving others. That is not humility, because none of us can presume to know how much time we actually have. And so, let me close with this just encouragement with regard to Kibani. I want you to imagine you were one of the children in that community. If we're talking about walking humbly with God, one of the things that I think probably is just fairly easy to point out is that, hey, there is no good reason why any of us are here right now. How many of you, before you came through the birth canal, earned your right to be born in a place as wonderful as this? None of us has the right to where and to what circumstances we were born, to all that we might be enjoying in this country and all that it affords to us, having all the access that we have access to. It is a gracious act of God that says we have been given the circumstances that we enjoy. And so what humility says, walking humbly with God says, hey, that child in Kenya, that could have been me. That could have been my child. That could have been the future of my people. He's shown you, O mere mortal, what is good, what the Lord requires of you. Do justice. Love mercy. Walk humbly with God. I want to close by just reminding us that Jesus is our example for what it means to do these things. In a moment, as we close our time together, we will come to his table and we will eat his supper. And so let me, as we prepare our hearts for that moment, and hopefully for whatever it is that God is doing in us and what God is calling us to, can I just share with you words that Paul used to describe what is encapsulated in this ritual of the Lord's Supper. Shana quoted a bit of it just a few moments ago. Here's what Paul says about Jesus. He says, though he was God, even though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. when he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honor and gave him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the Father.